Thank you. It is a great honor and privilege to have this opportunity to speak to every one of you, knowing that this is our first time, especially from the Pacific, for that matter, from Papua New Guinea, to participate in just a summit organized by global ministries or global alliance. We were not actually aware that we would be doing up a presentation in this summit. We were only asked last night. So what I'll obviously do is just give a brief overview of my work back in Bougainville. Bougainville, let me start by saying, to me, life is all filled with mystery, challenges, learning processes, and of course, adoption. That to me is a sort of a leverage that encourages me to be proactive in every walk of life. That is why I firmly believe that no matter what we may plan, if it doesn't work, there's still a way around that we can still achieve what we had worked for, what we had labored for. For most of you, Bougainville may be a new place, but Bougainville is an island in the Pacific, more aligned with the Solomon Islands, closer to Indonesia and Australia. It's named after the Prince Explorer Captain de Bougainville. So we have got a connection to Europe. And most of the developments, most of the civilization process or the early stages was spearheaded by Germans. So in other words, we are a European colony. But later, through the arrangement of this League of Nations, we were transferred to Australia. So then from 1945 up until 1975, we remained under Australian rule. We went through a very destructive war for a very short period, for less than 10 years, but it cost about 20,000 lives, in which I was one of the rebel leaders. That's why you see me, leaping around. And that, in fact, became a turning point for me. Not only that, but during the war, I lost my wife and a daughter. So that, made me to refocus. At that time, I was in university, but because of the uprising back in Bougainville, and because of these structures that we have, the social structures that we have, it was a requirement that I have to go back and attend to my elders. So, being one of the few educated youths around that time, I was then given the responsibility to lead and to make sure that the wish and aspiration of my people somehow was addressed at all cost. But as I did mention, because of the consequences that I went through, I then made a shift. And that shift made me to be a peace builder, and I stand to be a peace builder. So my engagement was basically with civil people, civilians, with civil society organizations, with simple people. It didn't even matter if I ended up in prison, not for what I did personally, but I spent more than 24 months in prison from both sides, even by my people, because I made a shift. With them, it was about 18 months. And then another 6 months under the Papua New Guinea Security Post custody. But that to me was more like an encouragement to be focused on what I actually decided upon. So the arrangement with the Papua New Guinea government and the people of Bougainville then in 1997, from 1997 up until 2001, through the process of what we were introduced to over the weekend, and then we also had a few other lessons from Dominic, through the restorative circles, what we obviously did in the 4 years was talk among ourselves. And the current peace agreement that was signed on 30th August 2001 was one of the more than 20 agreements that was signed, one of the more than 20 peace agreements that was signed. And that agreement actually represents people of Bougainville, the government of Papua New Guinea, that was witnessed by the international community, including United Nations, including neighboring countries in the Pacific. The provision in the peace agreement was very simple. 3, in fact. One was that of peace building, including disarmament. The other one was basically autonomy building in compliance with international standards of good governance and accountability. And then the third being referendum, meaning 10 to 15 years after the establishment of the first government, elected government in Bougainville, we will have an opportunity after 15 years, before 20 years, an opportunity to vote either to be independent or to remain as an autonomous region within the sovereign state of Papua New Guinea. And in that agreement, what actually was stipulated there as an obligation for Bougainville was fourfold. One was that of us dealing with the original conflict, issues that led to the conflict. The second was to deal with issues that arose from the conflict. Third was basically that of prevention. And fourth was basically that of proving ourselves that we can govern ourselves and take care of our own affairs. That time, it was only the agreement. And we knew very well what we gave to ourselves. But then the challenge was, how do we go around this? A lot of research was done. A lot of international specialists came in, giving us structures, giving us infrastructures, giving us guides on how we go about that. But then, that time, Nick was the Speaker of the First House. When I was taken on board as being a research officer, specifically to do research on peace building and good governance. So by 2009, I was able to finish our government with the research results that then made way for the establishment for the Ministry for Peace and Reconciliation and Weapons Disposal. And then in our government, what obviously happens is that, the term of government is 5 years. So the first government got elected in 2005. Came 2010, there was a change in leadership. So what actually happened then was, with the first establishment of the Ministry for Peace and Reconciliation, including weapons disposal, I was the CEO. But with the new government, then Nick was then appointed as being the CEO to head the department under a minister. And then immediately after that, I was then appointed as the first secretary of the ministry and also the lead advisor advising on peace building, including weapons disposal. So one of the primary responsibilities I had was basically what I normally, in Bougainville, I've described this as being MEL. That's monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So one of my primary tasks was basically to monitor, evaluate, and learn from lessons in the implementation process. So this time, what obviously has happened is that we have now developed a strategy that brings together work of civil society organizations, government departments, and also districts and village, the general public. Also bringing in the government of Papua New Guinea, also including international bodies, both multi and bilateral partners. So our strategy at the moment now focuses on, it was just approved a day before we left by the government. So our strategy obviously focuses on the idea of facilitating stakeholder involvement and participation. It's all about equality. It's all about you come with your program, we consolidate that, mainstream that, and then we prioritize. So everyone will have a space to actually go about, implementing what that organization or what that individual thinks is needed by the people of Bougainville. So Nick will have that challenge of actually seeing that that strategy is fully implemented. I think one of the things that I also need to mention here is through that strategy we have now managed to attract international support. United Nations had committed UN Peacebuilding Fund to implement that strategy. And I'm so much proud to say Bougainville is the first in the Pacific region to be eligible for the UN Peacebuilding Fund, and it is through that strategy. And if my records are right, we are the first autonomous region in the world to qualify for the UN Peacebuilding Fund. And the challenge we have, I mean, me personally and Nick, is to prove on behalf of the other autonomous regions, autonomous arrangements throughout the world, to prove that we know what our problems are and we know what our solutions are. And all we need is just the support. So the other thing that I also need to share here is, being a peace builder, I go by 7 principles. First and foremost, I need to have an understanding of what issue that I'm handling. That's the beginning. The second thing that I need to understand is, what have I got to contribute? You will realize with most peace builders, when they get the popularity, they aspire to become politicians. They aspire, for leadership positions. For me as a peace builder, that's not my aspiration. I aspire for a peaceful community. And then the third most important thing is basically to know exactly the weaknesses and strengths of the factions that I'm dealing with. And then I have to plan my interventions, how I get around to get these factions together. So that there's solidarity. Through solidarity, then will come into effect the principle of subsidiarity, that each and everyone will have a stake in whatever we will be doing, not just sitting back and watching, not expecting. The other thing is, what I go by is not for me to become a friend nor an enemy. Basically, this means I must not align myself with one faction and maintain that position, but every time I must maintain my neutrality. The other principle that I go by is, in everything that I do, I must be a facilitator, facilitate celebrations. Let them enjoy. Let them acknowledge each other. And then the other thing also that I go by is, I've destroyed during my youth periods. I mean, I was a youth at that time when I led the rebels. So I go by the principle of, this time around, I must be part of the solution rather than being the problem. Obviously, what I'm saying here is, we come from the far end, without knowing that there was already something in place that is, dealing and emphasizing on infrastructure for peace throughout the world. We have actually made our way up. And I'm so much privileged that we have now connected. And I think we have got the experience, and you have got the potential. All this put together, the challenge then is, what can we do as a team? With that, thank you very much.